All right, let's play America's favorite game. Who's on the hot seat? Dun, 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 dun. Cue the music. All right, Mike, I got 6 teams for you, 6 really bad, struggling teams. A few teams have been admitted because of first-year coaches. You've got Ron Rivera with Carolina. They're probably one of the most entertaining 2 and 6 teams I can recall in recent memory. Denver with John Fox. I'm giving him a free pass. So that leaves us with 6 teams on this list that have just been really bad this year. And I want you to tell me if you think they're on the hot seat and what level of hot seat are they on. So let's begin with Indianapolis. Jim Caldwell. Colts lose another game. They dropped to 0-8. They're just as listless as the New Orleans game, although the score didn't quite reflect that. Jim Caldwell, is he on the hot seat?
I think Jim Caldwell's pants must have holes in them right now. It's so hot on that hot seat. And it's a shame that he's the first coach that we have to, skewer with our coaching carousel. But he's gone. Even when he went to the Super Bowl, you could tell that that was Tony Dungy's team, and it was Peyton Manning's team. And Dungy left him in really good hands. I mean, Caldwell even messed up in the Super Bowl. He called a pretty bad Super Bowl as well. Last year, they barely made the playoffs. This year, look, I know there's no Peyton Manning, but there are other reasons why this team is failing. Their defense is in the bottom of almost every defensive statistical category. They're just awful. I mean, he doesn't even make the right adjustments to games. It's just he doesn't care. I mean, it looks like he doesn't care. I know he cares, but it doesn't look like he cares. And it shows on the field.
Right. He has that nonchalant, sort of dumbfounded look, whether they're winning or whether they're losing. And obviously with Manning, it makes things a lot easier. And I think the team's confidence overall has just taken a hit without Manning in the fold. It's sort of like they lost their leader or even their coach, you could almost say, their on-the-field coach. And they sort of look lost without him. Okay, so let's go to St. Louis. Steve Spagnuolo and the Rams get a huge win, and a surprising win at that over New Orleans. They jump out to a 24-0 lead, hold on to beat the Saints. Steve Spagnuolo, the Rams have their first win of the season. Sam Bradford's been kind of hurt on and off this year, a number of other injuries. Is he on the hot seat, year 3?
I think his seat's warm. I know he had a really tough first year, but that was basically taking over for talent that, was just bad. I think it's Scott Linehan's team. He's had a tough year this year, but last year showed so much improvement. And, Bradford's been hurt. There's a new offense with Josh McDaniels. They lost Pat Shurmur to the Browns. Now he's the head coach. It just doesn't seem like everything's worked because of the lockout, implementing that new offense. And Josh McDaniels' offense is similar to the Patriots offense, which is what his background is. And that's a tough offense to learn. I think, yes, he's feeling a little bit of heat, but, his defense has been phenomenal. If you watch that Saints game, they were after Drew Brees. They were relentless. Quinn looks like the real deal, their first-round pick. Chris Long has greatly improved under Spagnuolo's lineage. They seem like a team on the rise. They're way too talented to be with the record that they have. And I honestly thought they were going to win the division this year. Hopefully they can turn it around and get some 5 wins, and then Spagnuolo will be safe. I think he's safe.
And their schedule definitely gets softer as the season goes on. They basically have the entire NFC West still to play. And while the 49ers are no easy out and might be one of the best teams in the league, everyone else is just dreadful. Speaking of the NFC West, what a segue. Arizona and Ken Wisenhunt. Oh, they're just having a marvelous season. They give up a bounty for Kevin Cobb. They have very little time to put him into their system. The Cardinals come out of the gate and barely beat Carolina week 1, and they haven't won since. Arizona is 1-6 after blowing a massive lead to Baltimore, predictably almost. 24-3 they were up as much in the first half, 24-6 at halftime, and then Baltimore slowly climbed back into it and eventually knocked Arizona out on a late field goal. Ken Wisenhunt led the Cardinals to the Super Bowl, back-to-back NFC West titles, win improvements in his first 3 seasons, and now it just seems like since Kurt Warner has left, the roof has caved in on this Cardinals team. Is it time for new blood in Arizona?
I don't think so, especially when you've got this bounty, like you said, for Kevin Cobb. I just feel so bad for him and Ken Wisenhunt. They're having Cobb play a game that he's not supposed to be playing. Cobb is a West Coast quarterback, plain and simple. They're having him air it out way too often. in Arizona, and that's not helping. I mean, he's got probably the worst offensive line in football protecting him. Whisenhunt is a brilliant coach, and I think that he's got one more year left. I mean, I think if you get a team to the Super Bowl, buys you 3 or 4 years. Look at Tom Coughlin. I mean, he should have been fired last year, but he won a Super Bowl, and everything's good. He'll probably be with the team for the next 5 years. So I think Whisenhunt, he better watch out next year, but I think due to the lockout and the bounty for Cobb, you want to keep Cobb in the same system as he's trying to learn. You don't want to Alex Smith him and change up his offense every year. So I think Whisenhunt's safe just because I think the ownership in Arizona trusts him. And I think the players trust him. I think they stand behind him. I think they've had some awful breaks, but I think that Ken Whisenhunt's safe.
One name you don't seem to hear associated with the Cardinals, and maybe it's because Whisenhunt is presumed safe for now, is Bill Cowher. And, the Cardinals seem to love these former Steelers guys. Well, you got a very, very successful former Steeler who might be out there. Let's just assume for a second that Whisenhunt might be on the hot seat. Would Cowher be a good fit in Arizona?
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, they would run similar offenses and defenses, but I think that he wants to stay on the East Coast. I know he has a house in North Carolina. I think that he's more of like the cold weather type football. I think Arizona, being in a dome, that's not his type of football. He likes nitty-gritty football, and I think that he's eyeing that New York Giants job. If Rex Ryan talks too much and builds him up and then loses tremendously, I think he could look at the Jets job. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he looked at the Jaguars job next year. I just think that the East Coast is for him, and I don't really necessarily think it's a big fit. He's not used to having guys like Larry Fitzgerald on his team, and not that he couldn't utilize them, but that's not his type of player.
Shift our way to the Great Lakes in Minnesota, where Leslie Frazier is in his first full season with the Vikings. It's been a rocky one at that. Now, granted, the Vikings, pretty reasonably impressive win over Carolina, given how much the Panthers have improved, despite their win total not really changing all that much. So the Vikings now have 2 wins under their belt. They've made the quarterback change, and I don't think there's any doubt that they're sticking with Ponder the rest of this year. Unlike a Tebow in Denver, Ponder really looks like he looks comfortable in this job, and he only figures to improve. Now, I'm sure there'll be some bumps in the roads and whatnot, but you also have a guy like Adrian Peterson, and there's a foundation there. They may not be great, but it's not hard to envision them being a team that can come back next year and maybe be a sleeper team. So Leslie Frazier, given the recent resuscitation of the Vikings, where does he stand on the coaching carousel? Hot seat or not hot seat?
Not hot seat. I mean, this is, like you said, this is his first season as the head coach for the whole season. Wolf, their owner, knows that this is going to be a rebuilding process. The roster was very old for years. I mean, people forget. You had Pat Williams, who was like 38. They're retooling, and they're really starting to get younger. When you have Deshante Shanko out there, and he's in his mid-30s, and he can barely catch a pass, it's a good thing they drafted Kyle Rudolph. They're going to improve. I know this was kind of like a step back, but when you draft a quarterback in the first round, it's a rebuilding process, especially with a new coach. And normally you get a year, unless you completely screw up. I think that if he wins 5 games this year, he's safe.
Plus, the NFC North is a dogfight, and I'm not counting out the Bears just yet in terms of being a playoff team. And, of course, you've got the Packers who are undefeated, and the Lions also starting to be on the up and up. From one M to another M&M, Miami. The Dolphins. America's punching bag for the last 8 weeks. Tony Sparano's job is one giant joke. Yeah, the Dolphins are one of the strangest teams in the sense, I think someone put it best today when they said, it's hard to see the Dolphins being a team that's tanking right now, because if they're doing it, they should win an Academy Award because of how close they're losing some of these games. Whereas the Colts are in free-fall mode, the Dolphins keep squeaking by, managing to lose. They were right there with the Giants on Sunday, probably could have won numerous times, but they didn't. So the Dolphins are 0-7, firmly entrenched in the suck-for-luck suckiness. Tony Sparano, we figure that he's gone at some point. When?
I actually told you earlier, joking around, I think it'll be when the Colts win a game. I think they're going to ride this losing streak as long as they can to ensure that they get that first pick in the draft. it's almost comical to watch Sparano out there. I mean, you feel bad for him, but he doesn't even want to coach this team. And they don't want him to coach it. So they don't want to put him out of his misery because they are paying him. And, I mean, they know they're going to lose. So they might as well lose and not put another coach in harm's way.
And it's one of the stranger situations in recent memory, because there used to be outcry, get this guy out of town, they're not going anywhere. But it's almost like fans in South Florida are so numb to how bad the Dolphins have become, and the whole Andrew Luck is our savior thing that's going on in South Florida, that it's almost like, you know what, just let him stay in place, just keep things the way they are, and just clean house at the end of the season. I'm trying to think of a team in recent memory with a coach that you knew was going to get fired. Maybe Carolina, but I didn't feel like there was the same level of anger/numbness from the fans. Can you think of a recent situation that resembles this one?
No, not really. I mean, even Rod Marinelli, when they were 0-16, the fans still loved him. I mean, you can talk about general managers that people hated, Matt Millen, but I think they're keeping Sparano around, personally, like my opinion. This is not based on any inside knowledge or anything, because I think that Ross realizes as long as Sparano's there, he's going to be the one that takes the heat, not Ross. I mean, Ross has taken heat, but he hasn't gotten it, nearly as bad as Sparano. And you know what? As a fan, I think people find it fun to hate Sparano because that gives them an excuse to why their team's bad.
Right, and when you've got a guy celebrating field goals like he just won the championship, it used to be a nice thing, it was like, yeah, he's good and fiery and this and that. And now it just seems like they celebrate mediocrity because the team scores so few points.
Yeah, it's like the Grammaticas are back, but the thing is that like I think that Sparano has become the much needed punching bag for this. I mean, when you look at a new team, they're not going to cut 50 players. They're going to have to deal with these players next year, these fans. And so I think it's easier to deflect onto Sparano as opposed to the talent level. You know what I mean? It's a good deflection because they know that half this team's going to be back next year. I mean, they might all be bench players, but they're going to play. I think this is actually a pretty decent, counter to the putrid performance that they've put forth.
Clean the house. Jacksonville, final team on this list. And it says here that Jack Del Rio has one playoff appearance. He's been a good coach for the Jaguars, never been a great coach. They've had some quality teams. They had a few years where they did better than they were supposed to. And then, of course, the year that they just happened to run into the buzzsaw, that was the New England Patriots of 2007. And they still almost came out with that game. Ever since then, not so fortunate. And the Jaguars are one of those teams. There was something I read today that said Blaine Gabbert is interesting in the sense that he seems to be getting worse each week. So two questions. What kind of hot seat is Jack Del Rio on? And is Blaine Gabbert really the answer in Jacksonville?
I'll start with the Blaine Gabbert question. I think they started Blaine Gabbert way too early. I said throughout my draft coverage that this guy was going to have to wait a year or two. He's used to spread offenses, which are significantly easier to read. And I think that you saw how much Luke McCown struggled, and he's been in the league for years. So why did he think that it was going to improve the team by having Blaine Gabbert out there? I do think he's regressed, but I also think that has to do with injuries on the offensive line. Their receiving core is absolutely atrocious. When Jason Hill is leading your team in touchdown receptions, you've got problems. I mean, Maurice Jones-Drew can only do so much. They know just to stack the box on him. It's bad. And I've been calling, and as for your Del Rio question, I've been calling for his head for 3 years. He's such a nice guy, but he just really, he's been there too long. You always hear about coaches being in a team for too long and players get sick of their message. They just tone you out after a while. And that's what seems to have happened. Even though he's got a bunch of young players, it just doesn't seem like anyone really buys into his motivation anymore. I think he'd be a great assistant coach. I just don't think this team is going to win with him. I think he's had his time. He and David Garrard made their bones by beating the Steelers a few years ago, and at least Del Rio, up until this point, has just lived off of that win. So I do think that it's time for Del Rio to go.